There's nothing complicated about it. If people start explaining complicated things, you need to have some fancy IQ with some fancy, forget all that. You don't need that because salvation has to be accessible to anyone.
Can you address the idea that the Christians say about this whole rapture thing, the rebuilding of the temple, the Antichrist, and where all the errors are in that? And I don't even know how they came up with this stuff, but it's kind of confusing for people that are coming out of Christianity, because we know there's a temple involved and we know there's certain elements involved in the new messianic age coming in. But I think sometimes if you're coming out of a faith like Christianity and you're trying to see the truth, it's very, very blurry.
The rapture of the church is a great example of that, and you'll find references to the rapture in the oldest surviving Christian literature, which is not just the letters of Paul, but 1 Thessalonians specifically, chapter 4, 16, 17, where Paul is saying that it's imminent. And what happens is that all the believers, you follow me, they're going to be brought up into the clouds, and then God is going to deal judgment with the world. The reason I raise its age is that 1 Thessalonians is very early. It's probably written 4950. It's almost certainly the earliest surviving letter of Paul. So this is like 20 years after the putative crucifixion. What about those people who fell asleep? That means who died. I mean, okay, so we're going up into the clouds, but in those 20 years, a lot of people died. Like, what happens to them, right? Like they may have missed the train. They missed their flight, right? So Paul responds, they're going to join us. I think that's very telling. So Paul is alive. The people around him, his audience is there with him. And he is very much saying that we're going to see it. We're going to caught up in the cloud. And those who died are going to be joined to us, who will enjoy this paradise, and everyone else is going to come under judgment. Well, guess what? Everyone's dead. Okay? You can see the age of the book and what he was convincing his audience, that it's imminent. Well, it didn't happen. This idea that it's imminent is all over the Gospels. In Mark chapter 9, chapter 13, there are many of you standing here who will not taste of death before these events occur. This generation will not pass away until these events unfold. These are just baked in to the synoptic Gospels, in particular. John is very striking because it's the last chronologically of the Gospel written. And John is written so late, probably 95, around there, at the end of the first century, that everyone really is dead. By the time, in the ancient world, generally, people didn't live very long. The average expected lifespan in the first century is, 27, 28 years old. I mean, I ask you this question: if modern medicine did not exist, would you be alive now? I think most of you are saying, I'd probably be dead by now, right? The ancient world, people got an infection in their mouth and their teeth, and that was it. Some people could dodge bullets, but there are a few. So by the time we get to 95, it's all dead. So essentially the goalposts are moved, where now the kingdom is a heavenly kingdom. You can't be saved unless you are born from above, from heaven, rather than an earthly kingdom, because John's got to go, it obviously didn't happen. So John shifts the goal there. So that's what's going on is with regard to the rapture. It's very telling. Again, this is the end of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which is indisputed letter of Paul, no doubt. The Antichrist you asked about is thoroughly pagan, thoroughly dualistic, utterly unbiblical, and I need to explain to you what the Antichrist is. From a Christian view, the Antichrist, which is mentioned explicitly in the epistles of John, unambiguous reference to the Antichrist in Revelation 13. The Antichrist essentially is Satan, who poses as a Messiah, and he is set up where Jews began to worship him and serve him and draw in non-Jews. But he's really an imposter. He is an enemy of God and ultimately destroyed by Jesus by being thrown into an eternal lake of fire, and he's done. There's nothing like that in Torah. This is complete nonsense. What does dualism mean? Dualism is an idea that's very heavily baked into pagan religions. It's very logical. You can imagine why the ancient world possessed religions that espoused this view. Why? Because people saw immense suffering and immense joy and couldn't explain it. Why would one man have a wife and children, another man, his wife would suddenly die, and one area would succeed and one place would perish, and death was all around you. You know, imagine living in the ancient world where people died unexpectedly. Wheels broke. Infections and diseases set in which they couldn't explain. The world was so broken around them. So much was inexplicable. But there was an art that the ancient world possessed that we don't, and that is their ability to read the heavens. We don't need to look at the stars to know what time of the year it is, what time of the day it is. We have watches, fairly modern invention, cell phones, computers. We also live in cities for the most part with so much light pollution that we can't even see the stars. We can't make it out. You could if you were in a very dark place. So that art is lost. So imagine living in the ancient world and looking up at the sky and see the perfect movement of the stars and celestial bodies and the planet, and seeing Venus remain in the sky until morning. It is the brightest celestial body in the heavens. Perfection. That's all they saw was utter perfection. And look around you. Just distress, disease, and misery. Certainly, there must have been at least two gods who had sovereignty here, a good God and a malevolent God. And that's what Satan is. That's utterly pagan. And paganism makes a lot of sense if you're in the ancient world. We know now that we're made up of the stuff that stardust is. We know now that hydrogen is the most plentiful element in the universe, and it's all carbon, and your horse, your dog, and you are made up essentially of the same DNA within 1%. It's just rearranged somewhat differently. That means only monotheism is tenable. You can either be a monotheist or, God forbid, deny the Almighty, but paganism is no longer viable. Why? Because we know it's all the same, and we know that the celestial and terrestrial are connected. Galileo made that point, and that discovery got him thrown into prison where he died. So the dualism that there's a malevolent God, Satan, the devil, who is a full independent agent. Okay? He has independent agency, and he's a chief enemy of God, so well known in the ancient world. This Neoplatonic view of the world. The celestial bodies are perfect. I mean, imagine, you look up at the sky, and it's perfect. Everything moves with perfect symmetry. And look around you. Death was ubiquitous. Children died for no explicable reason. Surely these can't be the same gods, right? So it's Christianity simply adopted the pagan ideas that flourished about them. They simply absorbed, they collected it all, and then used a Jewish motif, had to re-explain what the Messiah is supposed to do, call it a grand mystery that only Paul has revelation access to through a personal revelation with Jesus Christ, which is superior to anything in Jerusalem. Like, why do you need that? If someone's saying that they have personal revelation, that means that you are a false teacher. That automatically. When I teach, what do I say? Let's look at the Bible, right? Okay. So the Antichrist is a malevolent enemy of God. And he's the chief blasphemer of God. That's what Satan is. And ultimately he's destroyed. So that's what the Antichrist is. It's thoroughly pagan. Now, people get confused with one point. So there's no such thing as a false Messiah at the end of days who the Jews are going to follow and the world's going to follow. It's all nonsense. There's another idea that's all over Tanakh that could be misunderstood and could be weaponized against a godly faith. And that is, at the end of days, there'll be enemy nations that come up against Israel. Our chief implacable enemy is Rome. It's the last of the four kingdoms. They sought to wipe us out only recently. But they will be defeated. See Zechariah 8, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 13, 14. See everything. It's Ezekiel 38, 39. It's very plain. There's nothing. See, that's the thing about the faith of Israel. There's nothing complicated about it. If people start explaining complicated things, you need to have some fancy IQ with some fancy, forget all that. You don't need that because salvation has to be accessible to anyone. Anyone could read the Torah. A 6-year-old could listen to the record of history baked into the book of Genesis to understand what God wants. Right? It's very easy to understand. That's the point. And just like water is accessible, we need it, right? Caviar isn't that accessible. You don't need it. I've never tasted it, but I'm told it's fantastic. But you don't need it for your sustenance. Wheat is a very durable plant. Grows anywhere. That's accessible. Torah is very accessible. But what's very hard for people is, who are raised Christian, my heart goes out to them, is they're reading Christianity into Tanakh, and then they get into an enormous amount of trouble. Christianity is the heir to Rome. Rome didn't convert to Christianity. Christianity converted to Rome. That sums it up.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא